graph of a function. So given some y equaling f of x and some y equaling g of x, we're just going to go through a bunch of questions using these two graphs. So the first one is find f of 4. So now keep in mind what this means here. So this is essentially saying I'm going to plug in 4 for x, and whatever that y value is, that's what f of 4 is going to equal. So f of 4 is the y value when I plug in 4 for x. So when I look at my f function, that's the red one here that we see down here at the bottom. So when I go to where the x is 4, so the x is 4 here. So then what I do is I go down to the graph of interest, which is this y equals fx, and I notice that it's this point that is going to be my point, and I'm just going to call it 4 f of 4. That's how that works. So anytime I see a point, it's a 4. When I plug that 4 in for x, I get my y value, f of 4. So when I look at the y value here, I can see that it's -2. So that tells me f of 4 equals -2. So when I see an f of 4 or an f of x, I'm really talking about a y value here. So let's look at number B now. It says for what value of x is g of x equaling 0? So what I'm asking is I'm looking at this g function here, and the g function is the blue one here. So when I look at this g function, it says, hey, where is g of x equal to 0? So really what I'm asking there is in my g function for what y is 0, because my g of x actually equals y here. So that's telling me that where is my y 0 for my blue function? So if you look at the graph here, and I look at where my y is 0, if my y is 0, I'm going to be somewhere on this x-axis, because that's where my y is 0. I'm not going up or I'm not going down. So I'm right on that axis. So all I would do is look for all the points where that occurs. So I have one here, I have one here, I have one here, and I have one here. Now look at what this is asking for here. It says for what value of x. So I don't want the y values here. I want the x values where my y is 0. Okay, so that's going to be x equals, and then I'm just going to go through them. So I have a -5, comma, I have a 2, comma, I have a 5, comma, and I have a 9, comma. So that's my answer. And that's all it was looking for this one. So now for the domain of G, that's all possible x values. So I'm going to look on this line here, and I'm going to say, hey, for what values is this function defined for on the x-axis? So how far left, how far right, and how far with everything in between. Okay, so when I look at this, I say, okay, so the furthest right I'm going is to this value here. And the furthest left I'm going is actually all the way. Now, the reason why I'm going all the way left is because notice, this is on an angle as it goes upward, which means it's going to continue left and up. So it's going to continue left all the way to -infinity. So now what does that mean for my domain then? So my interval notation for this would be -infinity to 9, and it includes the 9. So there's my domain of G. Now again, I didn't say this, but I was looking at the blue function because it said G, the function G. Now the range of G, which is the blue function as well, the range is all my possible y values. So now I'm looking at this axis. Now how far down, how far up does this function go, and everything in between? So the lowest it goes, it looks like that's here. And the highest it goes, it still continues upward. So it looks like that's going to be infinity. So this is going to be my low value. So when I look at that low value there, I would say that looks like about, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll say 4.25. Now again, you don't have to be exact here, just as long as I can tell you know what you're talking about. If you said -4 there, I would have been fine with that. But I'm going to put -4.5, or not 4.5, 4.25, comma, and the largest value is infinity. So there's my range of G. So we got a few more to do here. So let's take a look at F now. F says, for what value of x does f of x equal 3? So now I'm looking at the red function here because I'm looking at the f of x function. And it says, for what x is my y value 3? So I'm going to look here, and I'm just going to draw a line at y equals 3. So that'll be here. So now I'm going to ask the question, for what x value does my f of x equal 3? And that's my y value of my red function, because that's my f of x. So it only happens here. And it says, for what x does that happen? So I go here and I say, hey, that x value is -6. So that's going to be my answer for this one. So I'm going to write x equals -6. Now remember, I can have more than one answer if it permits it. Like if I was looking for my g of x function, I would have had 2 answers. But since this was only talking about f of x, I only get 1 answer. Because that's the only time that happens, is at x equals -6. Okay, let's move on to G now. G says f minus g of 0. So again, notice how I said that, f minus g of 0. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to show you what this really means here. This means f of 0 minus minus g of 0 equals, and that's what we're going to find out. So now what is f of 0? So that is asking, what is my y value when x is 0 of my f function? So here's my f function right here. So where is my x 0 at? So my x is 0 here. So then I ask the question, so what is my y value when x is 0? It's actually 0 because it's at the origin. So my y value is 0 as well. And I didn't label that one. I should have. So my y value is 0 there. So I'm going to put for f of 0, 0, minus, and what is my g of 0? So here's my g function right here, and where it's 0 at is right here. So this is saying I want the x being 0. What is my y value? And I can see that my y value is -3. So I'm going to put -3 in for g of 0. So then my final answer for this would be +3, because minus a negative is +3, and I have a 0 there. So now let's take a look at f plus g of 4. So that's really going to be f of 4 plus g of 4. So then f of 4, so I go to where my x is 4, and that's going to be here. And then I go to the f function, which is down here, and that tells me my f of 4 is going to be -2, because it's my y value when my x is 4. So that's going to be -2. And then for my g of 4, now I'm just going up to my g function, which is here. And when my x is 4, my y value is 3. So this is going to be +3. So this equals +1. Now we're going to list the x-intercepts of g. Now the x-intercepts is where my graph, my g function, which is the blue one, crosses the x-axis. And this might look familiar to us. We actually picked these out when we set our g of x was 0. Oh, I didn't write them. I did write them, but I wrote them in the wrong place. I missed a part, so I'll have to go back to that. Okay, I'll go back to that in a minute. So let's finish this one up. So it's going to be those same values that I had here. But I don't want to write them as just x's. I want to write them as ordered pairs. That's what it means to list the x-intercepts of g. So I'm going to write negative 5, 0. And I'm also going to write 2, 0. And 5, 0. And 9, 0. Because the type of object I get when I'm looking for intercepts are actually points. They're two lines that intersect, the x-axis and my graph, which tells me that I'm going to get an ordered pair. So make sure you write them as ordered pairs. Okay, the next one now, the y-intercepts of f. And I only have one here for my y-intercept of f. That's where my line crosses the y-axis. It's only right there. So it says I'm going to list that point then, and that point is going to be 0, 0. So when they're asking for x-intercepts and y-intercepts, it should be ordered pairs. Now the books don't always agree with that. Sometimes they'll say x equals negative 5, x equals 2, x equals 5, and x equals 9. But technically speaking, they should be ordered pairs. Okay, going back to that other one we missed, and I put it in the wrong place. This number c here. This is an interesting one here. This says for what values of x is g of x less than 0. So this is asking where is the y negative at for g. So when I look at my g function here, that's the blue one, I'm looking for where is my y value 0. And if you think about this, my y is 0 here. And anything above this, my y is going to be positive. Anything below it, my y is going to be negative. So really where it's negative at is going to be here and here, because that's where it's below that x-axis. Because at the x-axis, my y is 0. So where it's below it is where my y value is going to be less than 0. And less than 0 simply means negative. Okay, so that's going to be on the interval. And in general, and it says for what x. And in general, when I'm talking about this idea of a function being greater than 0 or less than 0, it usually says my y values that way. So it puts it in terms of x values when they do this. So that's why I'm going to put here, and not a bracket, but a parenthesis, 5, and it's going to go to here. And that's going to be this first piece that drops below. And that's going to be to 2. And then I'm going to use a parenthesis again. And I'll show you why I'm using those in a second. So then for the next one, it's going to pick up at 5 and go to 9. So that's going to be my interval for x, for which x values work when g of x is less than 0. Now the reason why I'm using parentheses for these is because this only says less than. If this said less than or equal to, then I would use brackets for all of those. But I can't be 0. I can only be less than 0. So I can get right up to 0, but not be 0. Okay, so that's all of our questions for this one here.